BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from NFL playoffs to pro and college basketball, UFC, MMA, and more. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable, BetOnline is truly the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use promo code BELIEVE to receive your rewards. That's BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your rewards. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Welcome to Believe in Celtics, brought to you by BetOnline. I am Warren Shaw. He is the great Gary Washburn, and we're your host and resource for everything Boston Celtics this season. Gary, the trade deadline has come and gone. How are you feeling? Sigh of relief. What's good with you, family?
Great. A lot of surprises, but the Celtics-centric situation, I'm not, they made a kind of a, we would consider a minor move. It could be a sneaky good move, but they got a little bit more depth. I thought that was what they needed. And they didn't give up a whole bunch for it. So I thought around the league, a lot of bombs were dropped. A lot of guys. I mean, the Lakers almost changed their whole roster, and obviously what Phoenix did, and Brooklyn and Dallas, and all these moves that we talked about. A few that we talked about last week. Kyrie going to Dallas Mavericks, but just a pretty eventful day. Usually it's not this eventful, but today. With a lot going on, a lot of fireworks around the league. A lot of teams just making moves. Russell Westbrook gone, Pat Bev gone, D'Angelo Russell. A lot of guys that we know, household names, are now, going to be looking for work or with new teams.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it does open up some things that are Celtic specific, in terms of the impact of some of those moves. I, for one, like many, was fast asleep when Kevin Durant got moved in the wee hours, if you will. And usually I'm up pretty late. So just kind of like literally maybe 10 minutes or so, I went to bed before that went down. But again, we'll get into that here, all kind of coming up here in the next segment. So as always, make sure you're following him on Twitter at GWashburnGlobe. You can follow me on Twitter at Shaw Sports NBA. Make sure you're following Believe and at all of their outlets as well, too, Believe Network or I Believe Sports. So before we get into the overall trade conversation, let's talk a little bit at home. As we record, Celtics 2-0 in the week. So coming into this, we're saying, hey, how are they going to go with this 4-game week? Big win against the Philadelphia 76ers while being short-handed. Unfortunately, Jaylen Brown takes an elbow to the cheek, has a facial fracture. Gary, your thoughts, or what can you provide Celtics fan on the status of Jaylen Brown? I'm already saying he's probably going to be out at least through All-Star game, so unfortunate for him. But how much time are we looking here for Jaylen Brown?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a couple of weeks. It all depends on the extent of the fracture. I think we'll find that out a little bit more tomorrow when we meet with Celtics brass. But obviously got to let the swelling go down. It all depends, on that, and then you got to get him. When the swelling goes down, get him fitted for one of those, Richard Hamilton, Batman masks. But I just think the Celtics being safe, it's a situation where it's like, why try to rush him back? Let him just get over. I'm sure he's just more. I mean, obviously he's sore and he's hurting, but and probably having trouble sleeping, all that and all that. But just let him just take a breather after that, taking that shot. And why try to rush him back? The last game, we're approaching, Friday. The last game before the All-Star break is Wednesday. So probably give him that break, then give him another full week off, and then see what happens when they resume play on February 23rd against the Indiana Pacers. So I think that's 2 weeks. I think that sounds like a solid amount of time. The swelling to go down. Obviously he was able to walk off the floor. And it didn't look like he was disfigured at all, but I'm sure it's a high amount of pain. I would not want that had to happen to me. And you saw the play, Warren. I mean, Tatum hit him flush in the cheek with the point of his elbow.
Yeah.
And then was kind of looking for a foul call after that. Jalen's agonized, and Tatum's like, "Where's my call, man?" So that's another story. But I think that they just got to get through this. You got a couple of winnable games with Detroit and Charlotte, and then obviously two big ones with Memphis and Milwaukee. But I think they'll try to move on without him. Let him get some rest. Let him get his self together a little bit, and then bring him back after the All-Star break.
Yeah, hopefully that's exactly what they do. Shouldn't be too long, but yeah, you're right. Nobody cares until I put on the mask. Tweets are probably coming from Jaylen at some point, unfortunately. Freak play, and it just goes to show you how fickle the NBA is. Like something just really kind of random like that can take you out. I know Embiid had got hurt right at the end of the Raptors series last year, with the kind of a orbital bone injury or whatever the case may be. So these things, again, they're human, and it's just kind of freak plays like that can happen. So Tatum obviously didn't mean any harm there. Just kind of an unfortunate situation, but hopefully Jaylen can be back, as you alluded to, relatively soon, right after the All-Star break. So again, if it's gonna happen, this time leading into when you get that full week off with the All-Star break is really, really immense, especially for players to kind of just recharge. So, hopefully Jaylen Brown will be back in the lineup relatively soon. So we'll swing things now to the lone move, as you were kind of teasing in the outset here. The Celtics acquire Mike Muscala from the OKC Thunder. OKC seemed to be a nice trading partner for the Boston Celtics as of late, especially the last couple of years, trading Justin Jackson and a couple second round picks. Muscala comes in as a guy, shoots 36 to 37% from the 3-point line. Big man 5 who can space the floor. I wouldn't say a rim protector of any sort, so to speak, but can definitely eat up some minutes, especially, if Horford or Robert Williams are going to need to rest days or miss some time, maybe take some time away from Luke Cornett, especially where his value is coming in as a spacer on the floor, especially for driving kicks, especially for like a Marcus Smart or Malcolm Brogdon out there. Your thoughts, kind of the making of the deal here for Mike Muscala coming to the Boston Celtics, and what can Celtics fans kind of expect outside of what I've just kind of outlined from Muscala?
Yeah, Warren. I mean, I think it's kind of a really poor man's Danilo Gallinari, 6'10", 240, a guy who career 38% from three, 39.4% this season. He's a guy who's only started 35 of his 475 games, so he's used to coming off the bench. He's not a guy who's logged a lot of games. The most he's played this season is 70, and that was about 8 years ago with the Atlanta Hawks. But he did play almost kind of a full slate this year, 43 games for the Thunder, 43 last year, 35 the year before. So he's not a guy who's had a lot of burn on him. So he's 31, but he's not – it doesn't seem to me he's one of these guys that's had an old 31 where he's played 82 games for 10, 12 years. This is a guy who probably still has some pretty good tread in the tire. And, if you watch that LeBron game where he obviously broke the scoring record, we can talk about that later. Muscala played in that game and played well. He did. Yeah, he was able. If I look at the numbers, he scored 16 points. It's on 6 for 10 shooting and 4 for 7 from the three. I mean, if you could do that with the Celtics on an occasional game, I think that's great for them. And also, when I think you can kind of put Muscala and pair him with Rip Williams, pair him with Horford or Cornette in terms of making him a stretch four. Like,
yeah, because
I don't. Yeah, this is not a guy who, like you alluded to, is not a physical guy in the paint. He's not a Jakob Poeltl or guy who's gonna do a bunch of dirty work and get 12, 14 rebounds. He's a guy who's gonna, get a rebound here or two, defend bigs, but also bring the bigs away from the basket, stretch the floor, and if you leave him open, he'll burn you. And I think that's exactly what they needed. That's exactly what they wanted out of Danilo Gallinari, because obviously we all know Danilo is not going to stop anybody defensively, maybe provide a little resistance there. And Danilo wasn't going to contain Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. He would just provide some resistance, but he was there to score. And I think Muscala is a guy who can just stretch the floor and make it hard on defenses. And I think what you want, Warren, if you're a Celtic fan, you want a guy to come in there and just take some relief off the starters. You want a guy who can help you win a couple of ball games with a couple of shots or make it easy on you so you're not playing Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown 39, 38 minutes a game down the stretch. You want to start tempering their minutes, cutting them down a little bit as we approach the end of the season, the stretch run, about 25, 26 games left. I think 27, if I'm not mistaken. as we speak. So, you want to start cutting down some minutes. And I think Muscala is a legitimate NBA player. He's not a guy you're finding off the street or some guy who's just, you don't know what, and as much as, we liked the Noah Vonleys and even a guy like Justin Jackson, like you kind of saw who's now going to the Thunder, likely to be waived. Justin wasn't quite, a guy that you could really rely on to get you quality minutes in an NBA game. And the Celtics don't need guys, unless you're talking about a JD Davidson, a guy's a prospect, a guy that hey, eventually he's going to be a guy who's going to get rotation minutes. You don't need those guys on your roster if you're trying to win a championship.
Gary, so I think that's a great, assessment of Muscala and what he can bring to this team, especially in the short term and long term, especially potentially a poor man's Gallinari. I think that's a great assessment for what they're lacking this season. I was reading, I can't remember which article it was, but more or less the assessment that Stevens really didn't want to make too many changes to the overall team. So it allows them they move Justin Jackson out and get Muscala in, so they still have a roster spot from that Vonleh trade earlier in the year, and that allows exactly what we've been talking about here for weeks now, Gary. Right? Potentially somebody in the buyout market, and you just never know who becomes available. So we'll save the buyout conversation for maybe one a little bit more when that's a little bit more subtle. Some names have definitely already been thrown out there, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I just kind of want to, for Celtics fans, Boston is one of those teams that a lot of times, especially from the Ainge eras, almost did something and almost. So can you shed any light on what you might have heard? Did they almost do anything else, outside of the Muscala deal? We know, Pritchard and Gallo and, some of those contracts were potentially being discussed. But did anything else even come close to fruition, on the trade deadline?
No, I don't think they came to anything serious, because if you look at the players that were targeting, like a Kelly Olynyk did not get moved. PJ Washington, Charlotte did not get moved. There's a lot of guys that, Pirtle, I think they made an offer for him, but I think San Antonio was asking a lot. And Toronto kind of was a good trade partner. They've done trades in the past, and Toronto gave them another serviceable big and Kim Birch, and then like a protected first rounder and all that type of thing. So it didn't sound like the Celtics were involved in a lot of just like, okay, we need this guy. I think their targets are more, as we talked about, more in the buyout market. And for NBA fans, check out the next couple of days. The guys that get waived, you're probably your Russell Westbrooks, your Pat Bevs, your Danny Greens. Danny Green's an intriguing name there. Warren, I mean, a guy who can stretch the floor, coming off obviously an ACL. A little bit up there in age, not a guy that you're going to do, but a guy who seems to be a very good team guy. He's always been a good guy in all of his NBA stops. Do you feel that 15th spot with a guy like that? Does he come and say, hey, I'm trying to win a chip? Because obviously he won a chip in San Antonio. And I think he was on the Lakers bubble team. But do you make an offer to him? And we talked about Terrence Ross, if that happens. But, the buyout market should be interesting. But I don't think the Celtics were like, very close to a big deal. I think that they obviously made their due diligence, made their calls. But, as we saw, there was some, everybody thought Toronto was going to blow it up. That didn't happen. Everybody thought the Jazz were going to just, the Jazz made that big deal with the Lakers. But after that, they were kind of chill. On what they did. They didn't give away their whole roster. And then Charlotte moved, obviously, Mason Plumlee and Jalen McDaniels, which I thought was interesting. I would have held on to him, to be honest with you, Warren, unless you don't think you're going to pay him. But I guess they chose to keep PJ Washington. Now we'll see what happens with his free agency.
Yeah, Gary. All right, I'm not going to go down the buyout road, because again, there are some names there that we can talk about, so we'll save that for another episode. But let's kind of turn the attention to even what you just did too. With the moves that did happen, and how they may impact Boston specifically. So let's start with where you just left off. Philadelphia somehow gets McDaniels on the cheap. A couple of second rounders. Second rounders were the order of the day. I don't know what was going on with that. I don't know how that set the market, so to speak. Why second rounders?
The second rounders have become the new, what are they, 40s? 40s a new 30. Yeah, the second rounders are the new first rounders.
I don't know. It was a really strange day to kind of see that, and the amounts on which they were kind of just copious amounts of that they were being dealt out in. But Philadelphia basically, to me, gets excellent PJ Tucker insurance. And in a lot of ways, as a guy who can, play some multiple positions, has now shown the propensity to even stretch the floor out a little bit to the 3-point line. Really good young pro. And for that price, I thought that was really, really cheap. I think a lot of teams are probably kicking themselves like, damn, have I known it was only cost us two second rounders or whatever it was, man. Definitely would have kicked the tires there. How
Yeah.
much better do you think the 76ers are now as a result of this? Again, it's only the one move. And their most of their work was done in the preseason. They move off of Matisse Thybulle. He gets oversent to Portland. But McDaniels come in, and I think is a significant move. Well, not significant, but a nice move for the
Yeah.
76ers.
No.
What are your thoughts on that?
Very nice move. I like Jalen McDaniels. I've watched him a lot over the last couple of years kind of develop. And that's why I thought that PJ Washington might be expendable, because I believed that Charlotte was going to hold on to McDaniels, who is a free agent this summer, and try to pay him instead of PJ Washington. Obviously, we don't know what's going on in Charlotte. They're an organization, even though they're
Oh,
owned
they're
by
cheap.
Michael. Yeah, they go on the cheap, and they don't like paying coaches, and they got to save all their quarters for that LaMelo extension. So I did not think that he was really going to be out there and available. And I do think that they got better. I mean, watching Philadelphia last night, Wednesday night, Warren, it was interesting to see just kind of how they really haven't changed, in a sense. Like, it's still the Embiid train, and then Harden, 26 points, Embiid had 28, Tobias Harris had 4, in 32 minutes. Like, they didn't have anyone else. Tyrese Maxey just wasn't good from the field. I mean, he can get you some points, but McDaniels, I think, and I just think in terms of a guy like Matisse Thybulle, who could have been a Celtic. I thought the Celtics might have taken a chance on him in the draft over that, trading with Philadelphia and for the rights to Carson Edwards, and that didn't really work out, unfortunately, for the Celtics, for your Celtic fans. But to me, Thybulle was just kind of out of place. I mean, he just didn't fit. He didn't shoot well enough. He was a good defender, but he couldn't shoot. Now McDaniels comes in and kind of an upgrade. He's 6'10", 6'11". Both those McDaniel brothers, the one in Minnesota too,
Yeah.
guys from the Seattle area. We talk about the Seattle being a fruitful place for hoops, and 2 more guys from the Seattle area. Both are good players, and I thought Jaylen was growing. Now, obviously, he's going to want a nice little bump in salary, so maybe the price was cheaper because he's a rent-a player, because I don't think he's going to, I think that somebody's going to have to throw some, 15 million, 12 million, something like that at him to get his first real major deal. But I think it's a great move, Warren. And I think the East, and we can talk about the East, and, Brooklyn obviously made a lot of changes, and, kept all of us, up at night. I got home from the game and was just ready to kind of sit down and chill and watch a couple of highlights. And was like, wait a minute, what just happened here? But I think teams like Cleveland stood pat. The Knicks got Josh Hart. But I think personally, the Bucks with Jay Crowder, bringing him in, I think they might have gotten a little bit better. We'll see what that goes. But it sounds like the East is now a 2-team race. I think some teams kind of fell back. Indiana decided to kind of, turn their chips in and maybe, try to make a push for the play-in. Indiana trades Mo Bamba. I don't know what you felt about Mo Bamba. Is that somebody that you could have seen play for the Celtics, and what the price would have been? A young big who just really never developed in Orlando. But I think that it's a 2-team race in the East. I think that some of the East teams help themselves, and some of them, Miami, Cleveland, we'll see what happens in the buyout market, but kind of stood pat, and that's interesting.
So, you've taken us in a couple of different directions there, man. I'm going to try to even organize my own thoughts because, again, it was all extremely, extremely well said and great content. Let's go to the Milwaukee of it all, right? So, one of the things you said there too, where Milwaukee and Boston clearly now seem to be the 2 best teams, with Brooklyn gracefully bowing out, or maybe not so gracefully bowing out.
Yeah.
The addition of Jay Crowder, I think, is interesting, only from the set of, like, and we haven't seen him, so we don't really know what we're getting. And I hate to keep bringing up PJ Tucker, but that's their PJ Tucker move from a few years ago, right? He fits their culture, fits their style, and again, if he's able to knock down a couple of threes here and there, God bless. Milwaukee didn't need to do a whole lot because they really are coming along now with Giannis seeming to be more healthy, Drew Holiday getting into his own, even Middleton now getting back into the fold a little bit, although he's still coming off the bench. Two-horse race to some degree, but neither one of those teams, Boston or Milwaukee, seem to command respect from the East because, as you alluded to, a lot of teams didn't fold in. The Raptors were like, no, we're going to saddle up. Let's bring in Jakob Poeltl, bring him back, if you will, and see if we can get into this thing. The Pacers kind of do this. The Bulls didn't sell off. They stayed in it as well, too. All these teams feel like, you know what? Kyrie and KD left the East. Well, damn, it might really be wide open. Why not us? And they're going to give it a shot. Not that the Celtics are going to take any extra motivation from that, and neither will the Bucks. But that's my sense of it, really, Gary, is that there's not a whole lot of respect. I think in terms of not fear. I shouldn't say respect. There's a lot of fear. I think what Boston or what Milwaukee has been able to do from the rest of the Eastern Conference. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do agree. I think every team's just kind of trying to figure it out, and I think that the team like the New York Knicks, Josh Hart. Yeah. I think they're trying to figure out and go forward because the Knicks are kind of all over the place. They lose a game they shouldn't lose, and they win a game they shouldn't win, or whatever. The Knicks are a team that could make some noise. Cleveland didn't do much at all. We'll see. And everybody thinks they need more shooting. Yep. Will that person be in the buyout market? We'll see. I think they'll be looking. Another team, and people thought that Miami might sacrifice Kyle Lowry, who's kind of out of the rotation in the sense of did not play in the fourth quarter a couple of games. And they're a team that seems very, like they've been waiting for good health. It really hasn't happened, but also they're not as Miami-like as we've gone to know. Yeah. Like Adebayo's still a beast, Jimmy Butler, but Hero. But you're looking at guys like Oladipo, inconsistent, Lowry. You look at some of them. Are they a real championship contending team? So I think the East is wide open in terms of Milwaukee and Boston should meet in the conference finals, but could one of these teams, Warren, put together a very good 4 games and knock off one of those two? I think it could definitely happen. But you're right. I think some of them teams said we're good. We'll figure this out. We're good at being the 4th seed. And we think we can win a game or two in Boston, or we think we can take the Bucks down. And so I guess the challenge is on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I go back to Toronto and some of the struggles Boston has had with length this year, and even now them getting bigger with Jakob at the center position and allowing Siakam to play a more natural, 4-man instead of some small ball 5 in some lineups. They keep Chris Boucher. They basically keep everybody. So that's not a matchup I would be excited to play. See them in the playoffs with all their length, and then obviously the machinations of Nick Nurse. Atlanta gets Sadiq Bey in a weird trade from Golden State and the salary dump of James Wiseman. Yeah. That was just some weirdness, but I understand the Warriors needed to save dollars, but then they trade 5 first-round picks to get Gary Payton II. Cool. I mean, whatever you need to do, that's on the Western Conference, so we'll keep it kind of focused on the East. But you brought up another interesting point and this will lead me into a little bit of what's happening in Phoenix as well. Phoenix, Golden State, now Miami, even Cleveland. So those teams who obviously Phoenix made a massive move, but they also gutted a good portion of their roster. So that buyout market now, there's more teams competing. I mean, it's always highly contentious, but at the top, if Boston specifically is looking to maybe make one more move, are they attractive enough, if you will, like the championship lore or the championship prospects should be, but do the personalities match what maybe some of these buyout guys may ultimately want? In terms of a role, when you compare them to maybe the lore of Miami, you compare them to a Golden State, and now even Phoenix with KD over there as well too. Do you think that might be more of a problem for Boston than it would have been had things not played the way that it did at this trade deadline?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Warren. I do think that they're going to have to compete. There's going to be some teams that are, could waive one of those minimum guys and create another spot. It all depends on how this buyout market shakes out. I remember there's been a couple of guys. I remember Dennis Schroeder. Remember we went to Houston. It was he'll never play a game with the Rockets, and last year he ended up finishing the season with the Rockets. So you got to see which team honestly keeps what player, or if it's hey, don't even show up to the offices. We'll send you a check and we'll try to we'll give you a good recommendation. We'll give you, we'll let you, we'll let you find a new team. You're right, Phoenix. Maybe the Clippers will be out there in the
Yeah.
buyout market, as you said. Miami. I think that the Celtics have a culture they're trying to establish. They've established in a couple of years. They don't want, you don't want a guy, and I said this earlier, and when people you don't want a guy who's going to be moaning about playing time. You don't want a guy you want a Blake Griffin kind of guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, Blake, we need you for Philly. You haven't played in a week or so. Get up, get it done. He did. They won. Now, okay, Blake, we'll see you after the All-Star break, or we'll see what happens, in the next couple of days, or how the injuries things go. But you want a guy who comes in there with the right attitude, the right frame of mind, and wants to put a ring on his finger. Okay, not every guy is like that. There's going to be, you don't bring Russell Westbrook in to be a guy who's going to give you 12 minutes off the bench and maybe get a couple of DNPs. That ain't the guy. Or Patrick Beverly or something like that. You got to find that right guy. So I do think that, let's say, Phoenix and Miami and some of these teams will offer more playing time and maybe a more prominent role, especially in LA. The Clippers are a point guard at this point. They gave away both their point guards, but a guy like Reggie Jackson, let's say, in Charlotte, or you want to bring in a guy. I'm not saying to bring in Reggie Jackson, but you want to bring in a guy who is going to be a team guy. You don't want to bring in a guy who is looking to get to boost his value for free agency so he can get one last big deal. So I think you're right, Warren. You got to be careful. And I think they're going to have competition for some of these guys. But I also think, Brad's talking to agents. Some of these agents are calling Brad and saying, listen, my man's interested in Boston. What will his role be? I'm sure Brad says, hey, agent, we're going to need this, and we're going to need a guy who's going to fall in with the team concept. We don't need a guy going to the media about playing time. I mean, we talked before, there's been guys over the years like, David Lee, who came in and was like, I want to play. And Keith Bogans, I remember, was like that. Veteran guys who come in and, kind of pout. You don't need that. You want competitive guys, but you also want a guy who is willing to fall in. And so I think that's a careful situation here. But I also think Brad, and these agents know the situation in Boston. They'll lay out their plans. These guys will say, hey, in Phoenix, this is what you'll be. In LA, this is what you'll be. In Boston, best chance to probably win a championship. This is what they want from you. What do you want?
Gary, I think, as always, it makes a lot of sense. And I think the Celtics are going to be in competition for some players. But that point you made in terms of the right guy, the right fit, that should always be the goal. But I think even more importantly now, again, you don't need to do something that messes up your locker room chemistry in any capacity. Things are going uber well. You're still top of the NBA, not even just the conference, the NBA. I want to kind of close with this here too. So, Boston made a small move with Muscala. We talked about how we both really like the McDaniels move for Philadelphia. And I'm in the middle in the Jay Crowder thing on Milwaukee. Which one of those three moves do you think is the most impactful for basically the top three teams in the East right now?
Well, that's a good one. I say McDaniels in Philly because he'll probably play a pretty good amount. I mean, and I think, I think the one thing, Warren, you've been doing this for years. You got to be a diehard NBA fan to know who Mike Muscala is. I'm sure a lot of Celtic fans are doing Google searches and saying, Mike Marsala, like Chicken Marsala, like they're trying to figure out who the hell this guy is. Except if you're in Pennsylvania because he's a Bucknell guy and you might have seen him play, and maybe some Boston folks saw him play in the Patriot League against BU or whatever they were, whatever conference they were in, because I think they played against Boston University when he was in college. But other than that, you're trying to figure out who the hell this guy is. I think the McDaniels move. Crowder is a guy we all know, we're all familiar with in Boston. So I think that the McDaniels move, because we don't know what Crowder's going to bring. He hasn't played in a long time. As we know, and I don't want to use the Ben Simmons example as a bad example, but guys who take a long layoffs, I would say. Okay, right? Now I'm sure Jay has been working out. He's a dog. He's gonna be working out. I'm sure he's gonna get in shape, but he's gonna take a while to get in basketball shape because there's working out shape with your trainer and running 5-on-5 at the Y and playing highly competitive pickup ball. Then there's NBA shape, right? Because that's a whole different category. So what will Crowder bring? As the last time we saw Crowder, he had tailed off considerably in terms of his shooting. So does he have something left? Is the guy who's pushing 33 now? Like, we don't know. I had a guy tell me around the league, like, listen, man, like, everybody wants to pick up, Celtics or whoever, pick up LaMarcus Aldridge, LaMarcus Cousins, these guys who are, out of the league. Or I'm watching Tristan Thompson on ESPN. Call him up. I mean, he wasn't terrible. He just, he had the off the floor things going on, but maybe he wants to play. But guy told me, like, listen, once, like, LeBron and Kobe are exceptions. Once some of these guys hit their mid-30s, they fall off a cliff. Physically, they're not, they don't have the smarts, quote unquote, not that they're dumb, but that savvy to be able to play till they're 35, 36. So we don't know about Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder's, I said, he's pushing 33 now. So what does he have left? McDaniel's a guy who's still very young, and Muscala, we'll see about what he brings. But I think the McDaniel's move is good. Like you said, the court is out on Jay Crowder at this point. As much as I like Jay, I thought he was a great Celtic. Yeah. He was great to cover. I did not want to see him get traded to Cleveland. I don't say it was a mistake. I think, getting Kyrie, I think, what would the Celtics done if they didn't, kept Isaiah? We don't know. But I think that I just have no idea what kind of guy we're getting.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap so that we can leave some more meat on the bone when it comes to the buyout conversation here on our next episode. A wild deadline. Kevin Durant and Kyrie leave the Eastern Conference, leaving it wide open for Boston, Milwaukee, and maybe the 76ers here to kind of take the reins. But the rest of the East did not back down. Everybody else making some minor moves, to try to kind of keep up with the proverbial Joneses here. So make sure you continue to rock with us here on Believe in the Celtics, brought to you by Bet Online. We're going to go and wrap it here for today's episode. Again, he is Gary Washburn. Follow him on Twitter at GWashburnGlobe. You can follow me on Twitter at Shaw Sports NBA. And that'll do it. We'll catch you next week here. Believe in the Celtics, brought to you by Bet Online. Peace.